All right. So we're going to talk about dog bias this time. We talked about human bias last time. Um, and we talked about, looks like my outline that I shared with you guys has got human in the first three slots, and it's actually dog. So, um, and I didn't change the date notes for 10:30, so I apologize for that. We'll send you a new one with those corrected afterwards. So I'm going to take basically the same sequence that we did last time, um, sequence of understanding of how we're a certain way, dogs are a different way. So let's talk about the morphology. With humans, we're upright. We use our spines to carry loads and be able to rotate and move in certain ways. Um, Dogs are different in their morphology. They're quadrupedal and they have front to back strength. We have side to side balance versus the front to back balance. Their side to side is not necessarily, we'll say, a strong position unless they spread their legs out and they lower themselves down so that they can change their status of balance and push off. But their main thing is especially front to back, or ours is side to side movement and then a directional. The interesting thing about our bodies is because we have our front paws free, we can do things with our hands and we can even do things with our legs that if we study well enough, uh, say a martial art, we can actually protect ourselves in all directions, whereas dogs, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the quadrupedal aspect of it is they have advantages in certain ways of movement and not in other ways. Their ability to back up is less than ours, although if they practice it, they can back up fairly quickly and in a straight line or curvature as well. Um, so the front to back leg length also is, and where their strength is, that front to back leg length or length, I'm sorry, um, uh, requires, and what's happened is the natural state of a dog is somewhat square. Some are a little more elongated, especially ones that are like sight hounds, which have the reason they're sight hounds is because it does them no good in their environment, desert or open plains, where or they would sneak up on something. They need vision rather than scent as their dominant, and so they move quickly. So the length of their body, uh, they can run down almost any prey that they go after out there. And so, again, specializations. Humans are not as specialized as dogs for various reasons, and we'll get into that. Neck strength and characteristics. So the neck strength of dogs is where their horizontal spine creates three-dimensional movement. So up and down, side to side, this snaking, and a rotational aspect, which goes all the way to the head. So all the way from the pelvic area up to the head. If we do that, it does us no good other than a rotational aspect of throwing an arm or a fist or hand or something to increase speed and strength or to move something, to pull something. So our rotation is used for things like that. Their rotation allows them to bite and then opposite action and rip something apart, which is what they do. So being able to latch onto something, the reason their teeth are the way they are with their canines, their premolars and their molars. The premolars, if you look, there's a little bit of a gap behind the canines. That's to bite into and have bone there so it doesn't crush their teeth, and then the molars back behind are the crushing part. So if they can get into an animal and hang on to bone, even if they're twisting them like this, they won't. If they just get uh, you know muscle or something like that, it'll just rip out, and they lose their advantage of getting that animal in its mouth. So their neck strength is paramount to their survival, frankly. And if you look at the body shape and the way that the neck comes down and meets into um, the chest area, the breast itself, it gets increasing in width typically, unless it's a well, all of them will, you know, and uh, and that's a massive muscular area right there so that they can whip back and forth as well as rotate at the same time. So um, that uh, creates a situation for them that is advantageous as a predator, a horizontal predator essentially. And then their leg length, again, generally even and square. Some are specialized, some are longer, some are shorter, but not by much naturally. We have created other things for our purposes. If you look at, the worldwide, the brown dogs, we'll say, worldwide, the pariah dogs or the village dogs or the natural dogs out there that are a mixed of whatever was around, um, even on islands that came over with humans, hundreds of years ago. There's still a brown dog, and they're generally, I will say, square. Um, as far as proportionality wise, they're not lengthened, um, and their leg lengths are not super long or super short. So as far as paw use, we use our hands for lots of things. Their paw use is obviously for ground, but they can also grab. They do claws, all of those things. They can grab onto things um, and hang on to it as a predatory action. So when a dog is grabbing, it's not necessarily loving you. It's not giving you a hug. It's hanging on for dear life sometimes. And people misunderstand those videos or photos of a dog in a shelter that is getting adopted. The dog is just hanging on to that person, going, "Please take me, get me out of this," because it's in a panic mode uh, in some cases. So. Um, but it's those paws, they use them for a number of things. They can also push away. They can do a number of things, but not as dexterous as us, obviously. And our digits are a little different than theirs as far as the dexterity that we have to be able to individually move these and grab things in the opposable thumb. Um, so obviously. So joints, they have simple joints. The hip, for instance, which is a ball joint, that femoral head. Um, and they have simple joints such as what we would call the elbow or the knee joint as well. The ankle, wrist, pastern are complex movement like ours are. So there are simple joints within the digits and things like that, but the complexities of rotation, it's not a simple ball like our shoulder is. Now dogs don't have a ball joint for their shoulder, and that allows them to move um, that front leg in a in a an extra fashion that a ball joint wouldn't allow them that stretch, that ability to gain that additional stretch for that next step. So they don't have the ball joint like we do. You can, other than the shoulder joint itself, our joint, theirs with just the scapula over muscle attachment. That's about the only joint that is significantly different between our two species. So hips, ball rotation, shoulders are non-jointive. In heat dissipation in dogs, morphological aspects, their their breathing, their respiratory system is the main way that they have evaporative cooling, and that's what mammals certainly have evaporative cooling as a means of dissipating heat. And so that's the saliva in the mouth, actually all the way into the lungs, that help dissipate that heat. And as the body, normally it's in the nose, the nasal cavity, and as long as the temperature is a certain level, that the nasal cavity can take care of that, and the lungs dissipation from internal. Since the lungs are deep inside the body, that helps regulate the interior of the body heat. And that's what most animals were like up until humans with sweat glands. Um, but so regulating internal heat is through that intake of air and out. Once you get to a certain point in overheating, in other words, energy usage, stresses, et cetera, then they have to open their mouth, which provides a lot more surface area. So the panting, and then as it gets even more uh, saturated with heat, then the tongue comes out long, and that provides more external surface area to dissipate that heat. That's why dogs hang their tongue out when they've done heavy exercises, or it's a very hot day, and it may be so hot that they can't dissipate the heat. They're not as efficient at dissipating heat as we are. Other areas are the ears, the inside, the outside, depending on the amount of fur, as well as the paws themselves, that surface area. If they can dig into cooler ground, um, but just the contact with ground or air with the paws. And the inguinal area, the stomach has much less, usually on almost every breed, has much less fur, and so the skin itself is exposed. So the lungs themselves, and then the inguinal area, and you've basically got lungs to inguinal area taking care of those areas, the paws and the extremities, and the ears and the extremities, and then the nose itself, the surface of the nose, and then all the internals. So it's pretty efficient for what it is, as far as evaporative cooling, or heat dissipation, a heat sink, if you will. So there's two effective ways that they dissipate heat. Um, Conversely, a lot of dogs, because dogs originated uh, actually in Siberia, in the Siberian area. Um, their fur was to keep them warm, and they didn't really. It was a rare summer day in Siberia that they had to use their other means and methods. Now, Siberians with huskies, and then eventually Malamutes across in Alaska and other areas, those types of more northern Spitz dogs, um, they also, because they work um, in conjunction with humans, have for 30,000 years that we know of, they dissipate, they actually create so much heat in their body through the stresses of pulling weight for hundreds of miles, that their body size is a specific size to maintain a body temperature. If they're too large, they would die of overheating, even in 75 below. So kind of an interesting study on those things. Um, So the environmental adaptation of dogs, the size, moderation, and mediation in warmer versus cold climates, and that's what we were talking about. Colder clients don't clients, yeah, colder clients too. Colder climates don't necessarily mean a bigger dog. As I was talking about the Siberian Huskies, it depends on their use and how the continuous use to build up heat, because heat is generated through the muscles being used, obviously. And so if you overheat, if you have too large of a body in a situation where it's what we would consider extremely cold environment, you overheat and you die. So the ideal size and shape of those animals, the Siberian Husky specifically, because of their speed, their longevity, etc., and how far and how fast they can pull weight. Um, that is, through all the studies that I've seen, is the ideal weight, approximately 50 to 70 pounds or so female to, and 55 being the ideal weight, 55 to 65 being the ideal weight for female to male for Siberian Huskies for that specific use. So, and then their fur, their tail, all of those things. What do they cover up when it's super cold and they're laying at night, for instance? They take their tail and they cover up their nose, so they're tucked in, and that nose gives off too much heat if it's not covered with their tail. Conversely, in warm areas, dogs are more slight, I will say, and the ideal weight for those is somewhere around 35 to 45 pounds, 45 at the max, actually. If you look at, the Basenjis, Pharaoh hounds being a bit of an exception because of but you look at the amount of fur versus ones in the northern climates. There's a lot less fur. They still have it to protect themselves from the sun. But Peruvian hairless, the Xolo Intsquitlis, those types of dogs, Peruvians and the Mexican hairless dogs, they're unique, even though they're in warmer climates. They're unique because of that hairless aspect, and that was partly derived from their uh, vegetation. They weren't in necessarily open plains, so that's a difference of adaptation. But again, you look through the equatorial areas of the world, the hotter climates, the deserts, and you're going to see smaller dogs generally. Then you have ones that were specifically bred by humans, and again, the sight hounds, especially in Egypt, they were introduced about 5,900 years ago, and by 5,500 years ago, they were specific. So the Egyptians used them for specific use of hunting, and they were taken care of. So the human intervention allowed a bit of a change. Number one, the humans required it. Number two, the dogs were allowed to be not natural, I'll put it that way, because of human intervention of taking care of them, providing food, water, shelter, etc. So it's a bit of that's where our aspects of being a co-species really has changed dogs and frankly changed us. Uh, so the environmental adaptations, obviously, in a natural way. Now, the others have been such as the terrier types, which um, there were dogs that had predilections to go to ground. Almost all dogs will dig in the soil and go after something, but they're not all shaped or tenacious enough to go after something underground, such as a fox or a rat or whatever else, they'll give it an effort, and they may not give up, but their body size is too large or their legs are too long to get anywhere into a hole. So that specialization of terrier types came from that aspect. And again, environments, mostly by humans, around humans. Um, so, and then we get into food types and nutrition. So, um, again, canines, dogs are canines. I'm not trying to be mercenary, but if you want to go into depth on nutrition, canine digestive system, I already taught that class. Excuse me. It's online if you want to go more in depth on that. I'm sure there are many other sources for at least nutrition types, but understanding the digestive system was the point of that, and really what dogs are, and then what what they need, and when, because it's not just one thing that they eat. So, and again, that comes from specializations of environment, types of dogs, those. And again, going to, for instance, that course, um, understanding the difference between human salivaric amylase and um, the amylase that dogs have, which is in the pancreas, uh, post um, post saliva, essentially. Uh, and the numbers that humans have, the copies of amylase versus what dogs have, where the least uh, number of amylase copies are Siberian Huskies and Greenland sledge dogs. Makes perfect sense. There was no grain where they lived. They didn't have to live off of what humans did with carbohydrates and processing grains. So, yes, Angela, you're muted.
Sorry. Um, Before you get too off base with this or too far away from this, because I think this is a really good question. How is the improvement of the hairless Zolo connected with the primal Siberian dogs?
It's about the environment itself, the environment that the Cholos lived in, created. They could go back anywhere from 4 to 7,000 years, and it was a natural adaptation to the environment. Um, yes, they lived with humans, but that adaptation to a hot climate, interestingly black, but the environment itself, because there was vegetation which allowed them shade in those environments. If you've ever been to Peru, especially in the Amazon side of things, um, that adaptation into jungle areas and mountainous areas makes perfect sense when you're there. When you're in Siberia, it makes perfect sense to have a fully woolly, you know, fluffy, medium-sized dog in that area, because it can also, that in both cases, those medium-sized dogs, um, they have the ability to find shelter where a larger dog won't. And so when when dogs sort of created themselves out of whole cloth, if you will, the proto dogs, it became more advantageous for them to survive, um, by being able to get into areas that other predators couldn't get them, because they weren't as robust, uh, we'll say, uh, in size, in strength and capabilities between bears and wolves in their areas. So they had to survive in those environments, and it was a specialization. That's what created dogs in the first place. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But they're not related other than they're both considered, Cholos aren't really considered ancient breeds, although they should be, because we're finding out they go back further than what was taught even just 10 years ago. They're probably around 7,000 years old, which to me makes it a unique and ancient breed. So,
Thank you.
okay, I hope that helps. Okay, so let's get on to canine capabilities then. So the speed, reaction timing, and the mouth. With humans, it's our ability to manipulate things, our speed of hands, whereas their ability to recognize reaction timing of something. It amazes us to watch a dog be sitting here and go boom like that very quickly onto something, their whole body moving at a speed. Remember that their frequency of how they perceive time is faster than ours. We perceive time at about 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second. That's how our brain processes things. That's our reality. Dogs are at 75 hertz per second, so they're a full 25% faster in their perception of time. So and their eyes are specific for movement and profile. So if they see movement, their brain's already on that as a predator. That's what you got to understand. That's that bias. The dog it's a predator. It can't be anything but. And so the brain works a certain way. That doesn't mean that humans can't screw it up or the environment that it has to live in can't mess it up. Okay. Can't cause trauma and fear and all those things. But it's still a predator. It's still that mindset. Now, what happens when a human messes that up, or a traumatic situation, that inanimate object, anything, is it creates an unusual stress that the dog cannot rectify. And so now it doesn't have a predatory answer to that. And that's what messes dogs up. So their speed is when their brain timing, okay? And then their capabilities physically is they're very fast within a short range. We have a longer range that we can, because of our arms and our legs, we can reach out further than they can in a very similar time. So if you as a human practice enough, if it matters to you, you can actually, I will say, out reaction a dog, not on time, but on distance. And again, strength front to back and rotational, that's their main aspect, their adaptation genetically to their environment and what they are, their morphology itself. Jumps, they have full body extensions. We don't do that. Although if we use our arms, we can't, we can grab onto things, but if we use our arms in a similar way to launch ourselves, to launch that weight, and we act in a similar way, we can jump fairly far, especially if we're running. But dogs have a greater capability because of the strength, length, and weight ratio compared to us. Now, if we were a lot less weighty, we could, and all our leg and arm strength were still there, we could probably jump better. But their speed is greater too, so obviously they have, and their jumps aren't necessarily higher than us. We can jump and rotate, do the Fosbury flop over a bar that's 8 or 9 feet high. A dog can't jump 8 or 9 feet from a position like that. It has to have something to go off of. So they can use speed to launch and go up even further. Uh, so climbing, that's only possible as part of a jump. They are not generally Um, yeah, I don't have a Malinois. Anyway, um, but so climbing is not part of the canine aspect. It's a specialization. Obviously, cats and bears, their claws, they have some ability. Black bears certainly can climb. Um, Polar bears really no need to climb in the way that humans do. So they have the strength and capabilities, but their claws aren't that they could latch on around a tree, for instance, but they would give up fairly quickly because there's no trees where they live, so they don't need to have developed that. That's not part of their environment. Um, so as far as climbing, they don't really do that. They can run rapidly, launch off, and go to a certain height based upon their strength and their abilities. Uh, as far as running, they can be extremely fast. Again, some of the sight hounds, um, you know, 40, 50 miles an hour is not an unusual thing. Most dogs can outrun humans, even the fastest humans, but obviously the smaller dogs, not necessarily. So again, depends on size. But use of defense mechanisms, we have tools that we've created. Theirs is tactics and strategies. So going back to what those two that one talk was last year about tactics and strategies and the differences and what it's about. Um, you can review that on their defense mechanisms and what they do. So their movement is to protect their hindquarters and to present the business end, the mouth, forward. If they're surrounded, you guys have probably seen videos, National Geographic, other places where a wolf may be out by itself and is surrounded by another pack, or even a bear, is surrounded by a pack of wolves, and the ones from behind are always nipping, trying to get the back legs or the hindquarters, and they have to turn around, which presents the back to the opposite side. So they're always protecting their six, if you will, and they're trying to make the threat all come from the front so they can handle it. Um, so let's jump to the canine brain. So humans, we have generally about 86 billion neurons. Dogs, on average, a normal sized, medium to large sized dog, we'll say, in nature has about 8.4 billion neurons. Still a massive amount, and lots of capability as far as intelligence and capabilities. But the breed and the size cranial differences that we've created is up to a 2.5 times difference. So that cranial capacity of even the largest dog, when you take it down to the smallest one, it's about 2.5 times less than 8.4 billion. Still a massive amount, massive capabilities. It's still a dog. It still thinks like a predator, regardless of its size and regardless of its cranial capacity. It is a dog. It is a canine. Okay. Perception of the environment and reality, it's about their senses. So again, explaining how brains came about from from diversified multi-cell living things, animals, what we classify as animals. Brains were developed to take the senses, that those differentiated cells that picked up what the environment was inside and outside of that glob of cells. They started differentiating and creating their own purpose, and so there needed to be cross communication and a control system of this glob of cells, and that's where nervous system and the brains started. So you only need, because of the energy sink, you only need what you need to survive. and the genetic mutations that have occurred billions of times over billions of years have created numerous different animals, shapes, sizes, even numbers of legs. If you know, there was one back in the uh, I think Triassic period of this odd little walking stick on the bottom of the ocean that actually had 7 legs. And nature saw fit to not continue that. They died out. So you got 8 legs, you got 6 legs, you got 4, you got millipedes, 100 legs, etc. But uh, the aspect of symmetry seems to do best in nature and the environment. And so when you have a dog that's symmetrical side to side, um, that's similar to all other mammals. We're somewhat symmetrical side to side when you look at down the spine. But their senses are how they perceive their reality. So that's why we go into depth in our classes at the Institute on what are the senses of the dogs? How do they perceive things? Um, sight, sound, smell, all of those things. Where are they focused? What are they about? Et cetera, et cetera. Because the more you understand those things, the more you understand how dogs think and respond to things. So, you have their perception of reality, you have ours. There are big gaps in there, and we'll talk about them next month. Lower brain, the limbic and autonomic systems, just like the human, where virtually identical as far as our corpus callosum brain barrier between lower instinctual brain, survival brain, and the upper brain, which creates, we'll say, value and thought and process. That that's still the same between species. It's why we can get along. It's why we live together. So the upper brain has developmental cognitive power. Uh, it it is where the learned aspects go. You can't learn unless you feel safe. You don't learn in a moment, you learn afterwards. Because in that moment, if you don't have the answer, if you survived, you learn from it because you think about it, and you think about what the next time I encounter something like that, what can I do better? That's survival. And that's what dogs do. It's what we do. So with concepts of social survival, humans have this concept of intercommunicative global understanding of humankind. And so we have these concepts of survival. As we have gotten more technologically advanced with weapons, we've seen fit to not destroy ourselves so far globally, and wish to go on, which is what life does. Um, Hopefully that stands. But with dogs, they don't think globally. They have no concept of the size of the earth. Um, that they're on a continent, on a floating, floating on magma that goes, thousands of miles deep. They have no concept of any of that. They don't understand the universe out there, the stars. Um, so their perception, their cognitive ability, and their concepts of social survival are what makes sense for them. The size of their territory, the number of animals, humans, dogs, whatever else in their pack that makes sense for them. You get too large of a group, and their concept of social size breaks down. Dog parks are a good, you know, example of that. There are successful places that have 200 dogs together that live together, but that's because they spend a lot of time doing things with the dogs in conjunction with each other. I guarantee you they do have dog fights and other elements. It's nothing is perfect. You don't see or hear about those, but dogs can only handle so much of that social pressure, we'll call it. Okay. So they think in terms of much smaller groups because frankly their packs are, you know, while dogs have become different than wolves that are their base, genetically, they're virtually identical, just a tiny bit difference. So genetically, they come from family and then an extended family. And possibly if you're in a, a an environment that allows for additional members outside of your immediate family to survive better in that environment. In other words, you've got the territory, the number of prey, the water, uh, the shelter, etc., to survive, and you can actually travel that far. Then you have the ability to have more. I think the largest pack of wolves I've ever heard of was about 46 or 47. And that's stretching it quite a bit. But they had a very, uh, and those things don't last decades. They last for the short amount of time that group, that leadership group stays together or stays alive, frankly. If they fade away, usually others do as well. So those packs don't hold together if the the leading pair, the mating pair, die or get infirmed or break apart, and for some reason. Um, so it's really limited as far as what they can live with, what we ask them to live with, as far as numbers of individuals, which again sets up a situation where we expect dogs to think like humans as far as the numbers that we accept. We go into restaurants, we do all sorts of things with numerous humans around and other dogs too. And we expect our dogs to think like us, and they do not. So, uh, their concepts of time, we've done this, in course one. If you've been through course one, we talk about the dog concept of time versus humans. We can think about well beyond the existence of the universe before and after. Dogs' concept of time is limited to their own lifetime and the ones that they understand are going to live once they're gone, which is their progeny and others that are younger that are still healthy when they die. They understand that, but there's not much planning for the future beyond their own lifetime, other than to pass on their knowledge. How do they pass on their knowledge? Through example, basically. They teach their young about pro-social behavior through sometimes antisocial behavior, antisocial to the puppy because the puppy is doing something wrong, which is actually that's a pro-social thing to do to help that puppy understand. Now you get along, you don't do those things. So, and then concepts of language and communication, that's another one of those things that we focus on in the Institute, because if you understand their language, their body position, movement, posture, intent, distance, speed, all of those things they communicate with, um, that is communication and that is their language. And you have to understand it from their standpoint, and most humans don't, obviously. And that's creates a massive gap because dogs are quote unquote talking to you all the time. They're communicating all the time based upon where they place themselves, how they place themselves, whether they're moving, whether they're static, all of the body parts, positions, all of these things. And a good study of those really helps everybody. Um, so canine drives, we'll just talk about, I'm not talking about, the Vollards, description in their books or articles type of drives, or what sport dog guys are using. I'm talking about survival drive and social drive. So survival drive is based upon the environmental responses, the predatory mindset. They are predators, guys. And sorry, but the dog next door is not part of your pack and not part of your territory. And that's why a lot of fence fighting and all sorts of things happen. Okay. You and your neighbor get along. Those dogs, more likely than not, are not going to get along because they see that as a separate pack. And so their survival is pure predatory action, and they have to do that unless you set up a situation where you work at getting those two to understand each other and to trust each other. The problem is they don't live together, and so you have a limited amount of trust level there based upon their interactions and encounters, how how they either see themselves in the backyard or if you put them together with another human, with their dog. And so that's a very limited trust level. And they're not just going to accept that other dog in that in your next door territory. So we'll talk about that later. So uh, how they respond to unknown surprises depends upon we'll call it the solidity of that dog. In other words, the dog that's got experience has learned uh, what is an actual threat versus what's not. Does this dog alert to the rest of the pack, including yourself? You are part of the pack. You're not mommy and daddy. And so does it alert? Does it come to you? Does it gather the other dogs? Does it run away? That's all dependent upon that specific dog and how it's learned its situation. What has it encountered? Is it actually um, well educated? I'll put it that way. That doesn't necessarily have to involve humans, but in a human-dominated world, it should. Recognize threat avoidance. So dogs, they will avoid an unusual aspect, a snake, for instance. Most dogs understand snakes are uh, just through genetics, through genetic memory. They understand snakes are a high threat. Obviously, um, barking at it doesn't do anything to the snake's behavior except moving off, but it doesn't excite it, it doesn't do anything. Coming close does. So, so dogs look at snakes in a different way than, for instance, a bear. You know, a bear, if you get enough dogs after it, it's going to take a few swipes and then it's going to run as far as it can as the dogs chase it off. If the dogs are big enough, and you know, the bear just wants to be left alone. Um, because dogs are generally quicker than the bear. Again, depends on the size and the experience of that. So recognize threat avoidance. Humans want to avoid threatening areas. Dogs don't necessarily want to, so they act in a predatory way. Their mindset is they are top dog, literally and figuratively. And so, so yeah, thanks, Tiffany. So, um, many dogs, not all dogs, but many dogs have the idea of their brain is they are a predator. Um, so they're going after whatever it is. It doesn't matter what size or capability, they're going after it first. And if they're barking, they're calling the pack to help it either determine what that threat is. If it's a threat, let's go get it. Let's get it out of our territory, or let's kill it, or whatever else. Okay. That's the way they think. We don't think that way in those normal terms. Okay. So fear, uncertainty, doubt, that happens with humans. It happens with dogs too, especially novel things that they've never encountered before, that they perceive as a threat. A lot of inanimate objects, the vacuum, the different things, the overexciting of those, and that causes that fear, uncertainty, doubt response. So, and then practiced responses of survival drive. So obviously that's how they handle things, is those practice responses. Now people don't understand dogs are practicing that survival, that predatory action almost all the time. They do it from the second they start crawling over each other as puppies before they can see or hear anything even. Um, so, and then you get into the social drives or responses. Humans in modern times, because of our concept of a global community and you know how many humans there are, we know all of this. We chose to live together for better life, security, etc. Dogs' acceptance of that, again, it goes to the local environment and the smaller groups. They don't have to or wish to accept everybody else. So that's a major difference between us. Morality. So a dog's morality is trust through patterning. You have to be consistent. The dog it lives with has to be consistent. Because if you behave in odd ways or inconsistently, then you don't have that trust. You become what you want the dog to be, or you are what the dog is. So a lot of neurotic behavior, and I don't mean neuroses as in, uh, clinical, but our behaviors as humans, these weird things that we do, like me talking into this thing with Bosch sitting down there going, he's just talking to himself again, monkey chatter for hours, um, makes no sense to them. And so when it doesn't make sense, there's not a there's a there's a it's not a distrust. It's they don't trust that you've got this, because this is different for them than it is for us. And that's where we've got to make efforts. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to December already. Sorry. So let's look at pack mentality, that pro-social aspect, and a proper pack is pro-social. Everybody in that pack is pro-social. That's proper sociality. And the pro-social aspect of it is anything I do may be good for me, but it's good for everybody else too. Not because I say so, but because of the results of it. That's the trust, and that's the pack. Okay. Now you as humans think, well, I do everything for my dog. No, you don't. You do it for yourself. And so the times that you do think about the dog and do things, those are times that the dog can count on that. But most of the time you don't. So it's a change of understanding on that. So social isolation, we talked about that with humans. We avoid it all at all costs. Social isolation happens even momentarily, but even long term through harsh punishment and ostracization from the pack, either dogs or humans. So it does occur. Now, we obviously, the people here, we don't want to do that with our dogs. So, but because it is a powerful aspect of that social response, especially when you gain trust of others and then they respond even a little bit, to isolate, to not accept, to turn your head away, then that affects them heavily if you matter. That's the key. If you matter, that's where the relationship is so important, because then it takes the harshness and the ostracization otherwise if you don't matter. So our lot is to matter. Why and how is the key. So in social responses, territorial boundaries are based upon survival understanding. So time, distance, pack size, and strength, resources, all of that, that's territory. And we ask dogs to live with us in our tiny little territories. We have plenty of resource that we give to them as far as food and water, and shelter, but as far as size of territory, doesn't comport with their brain as far as how do we get all of these resources out of this tiny little postage stamp size territory. So they've had to adapt with us over the past 15,000 years, what we call civilization time, uh, from roaming as hunter-gatherers with our hunter dogs helping us over vast wastelands, vast territories, to provide for ourselves, to this tiny little thing that we never get out of, except to go to another little tiny place and spend our day. So they've had to adapt, and they have, but that still doesn't make sense to them how all this stuff just appears. And we'll talk about some of those things that it causes down the line, some of the problems that causes. So canine senses, direct senses, the eyes, ears, nose, feel. We went through that with the humans. Dogs are scent or nose dominant, period, and their brains are structured that way. We are eye dominant, and our brains are structured that way. We see reality through our eyes. They see reality through their nose. If I could get that across to everybody on Earth, dogs and humans would live better. But we're biased because we're humans for our eyes. So um, their eyes and their ears are corroborative of what they smell. The feel and the touch and everything else make sense to them. They're trying to make sense out of the world through smell. So eyes and ears and touch all corroborate or make a pattern for the smell of those things. We look at things, we want to hear it, smell it, touch it to make sense for our brain of what we see. I don't know how to explain that better in a short amount of time. So that's the difference of bias. Okay, so canine learning abilities, their bias, once again, their morphology, their brain, their body experiences in relationship to our environments, which is what we're asking them to live with us. They're not going to respond to a bidet the way we do. They're not going to respond to a steak up on that countertop the way we do. We want to cook it and, share it with everybody. They just want to grab it and go because there it is. So, they're going to respond to things in a different way because of what they are. They're a canine predator. Brain complexities, understanding of survival in each issue. When you study dogs, and you should, when you study dogs, you should study how they respond to everything in the environment, everything that's placed, everything that changes, every movement. You should be studying those dogs to see how to categorize how things work in their brains and how they respond to that. Then you'll also have an understanding of the personality and the behavior of that dog and its experience level as well. You can see it so quickly when you study the brain and how that all works together. And again, stitching complexities together the way that they learn these complexities together to make sense and achieve acceptable results. We do the same thing. We use this point, that point, this, all of these things, and we try to make sense of all these independent things. That starts at birth, actually before birth, but from birth on the environment. We're trying to figure things out. That's what brains are for, and that's what their brains do too. And again, they're quite capable, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come about 40 million years ago as a species, canines, and still be around. The drive to learn better understandings and results for survival. That's a little different than humans. It is. We still do that, but we're looking to build something beyond us. That's our assurance. They don't. And to pass on information to family pack through teaching and observances. In other words, what they do well or what they do poorly, others observe and they learn from that. That's associative learning. And so that's where they're focused, is associative aspects of things. And then the cognition is trying it and figuring out how that other did it. So that's the social and practical survival aspects. So canine developmental timing. So we had, human ages, we'll say. So the ages and developmental periods. We have newborn, which is literally newborn, pre-estrus, estrus, etc. Then newborn. Then we've got the puppy neonatal, which is birth to 3 weeks. And then the puppy, there's a puppy self-ambulatory experiential phase. So it starts waddling around about 4 weeks of age to about 10 to 12 weeks of age, depending on which specific breed and the developmental specific of that dog, for instance, because some dogs are behind by a couple of weeks, even at that point, even within the same litter. And then you have the puppy independent developmental period of 3 to 6 months. And again, puppy development course, that's a long one. It's a big one, and hopefully, hopefully we'll have that up online next year. I've got to get the server done after this class coming up, and so I'm working on that through December, and we'll get that server and all of the courses online at that point. So if you had not had the puppy development class, well, I will cajole you to check it out because it goes pretty well in depth on things. Then we have the late formative period, which is puppy to young adult. Now, within that formative period, about 6 to 8 months is the adolescent phase. 8 to 12 months is what we would consider early teenage, so the experimentation with self, if you will. And then the 12 to 18 months is the late teenage period of time. And that's where dogs develop, they work on their already developed personality to try to figure out how to get through all of the stuff that they need to do to survive. Then you've got 18 to 24 months as the early adult. And that's all within that puppy development class. And then adulthood, you've got full maturity, depending on the breeds, 2 to 7 years, or for large breeds, 3 to 5 years. Then you got senior after a certain time. For small, medium dogs, it's going to be anywhere from 8 to maybe 10 years, depending on the specific breed that you would consider a senior. For large dogs, it could be that at 5 years, that's a senior dog. And I'm talking about very large, extra large dogs. And then you've got aged, like Bella right now, who's still going. Matter of fact, she's not on shots. She's not on gabapentin anymore. She's going around. So, she's getting close to 22 years old. That's ancient, ancient, ancient for a Siberian Husky, regardless. Um, so obviously the canine developmental timing, they have a much more limited time frame of life than humans do. Now, humans, interesting thing about humans and the way our bodies are, and when we start losing muscle mass, we start losing muscle mass absolutely at age 40. Why? Because we didn't need more strength. We didn't need to maintain that strength because genetically we were dead by 40. So, for 200, 250,000, maybe 300,000 years as humans, um, the life expectancy was around 20. And if you lived to 40, you were ancient. So there was no need genetically, our bodies to continue in that strength aspect, the speed and all those other things, and the deterioration of our joints and all that that happens later in life. I know all about that, trust me, at this point. So, but with dogs, you know, dogs, once again, if you look back at the natural environment, when proto dogs, wolves of a different line, were around, the average age right now, life expectancy of wolves is 4 to 7 years. And that's historically accurate. So it doesn't make sense for a dog to have much more than twice the length of time of nature as a life expectancy, just like it doesn't for humans. So we've extended it, but our life expectancy now is around 78 years old, I believe, here in not third world countries. And so um, that's about twice the 40 age. So most dogs are going to pass at 12 to 15 years old, unless they're smaller dogs, and they may continue for a couple more years. So their development is much faster. Their abilities and capabilities is much faster than ours. And we humans look at them as babies their entire lives, which is a disservice and disrespectful to them. Uh, that causes problems, obviously. So dog age perspectives, influences of age and experience capabilities is about needs, not about wants. And so the age and experience, obviously going through that developmental timing and timeline, by the time dogs are 6 to 12 months old, certainly they're capable of, if they lived in an environment, of starting to get their own food. They can perambulate in their territory and pick up an errant vole or a rabbit or something because they have the capability of doing that at that point. They may still require the pack at that point, but within a short amount of time. Now you can sit a 6 month or 12-month old human baby on the ground and it die because it couldn't provide for itself. So the developmental time is much, much different. And we need to keep that in mind because it causes problems and gaps when we think about them as human babies. Uh, so canine perspectives. So based upon being a canine predator, how dogs perceive the brain and body learns to survive and manipulate their world. So manipulation is not, I'm using that in a scientific term, not in a human emotional aspect, I'll put it that way. Um, and so their needs are the reason they chew up stuff, the reason they do what they do is because that fulfills their needs. So if we are not assisting and fulfilling how they see the universe and what their perspective is of survival, you're going to have problems. You guys know that. Helping your clients understand that is a key element. It's not to shame them or anything else. It's to actually educate them to say, you know, that's a canine predator, and at 2 years of age, it's like a 20-year-old guy. So that guy can go out and hunt and take care of himself. He doesn't need you to do everything for him. But people want to keep them in that neoteny type of situation, and that's one of the problems. So controlling outcome is easier than understanding a different result, though, just like humans. So dog emotions, the based emotions, we go over that in several of the courses. I'm not going to go into that deeply here, but base emotions, basically human emotions up to about 2.5 years of age is what dogs developed. They don't have learned developmental emotions beyond that. The things like jealousy, that's not what's in their brain. Those emotions don't exist. They serve no purpose in a short life, especially with a predator that relies on a small pack in the territory. There's no need for those things. So genetically, you have to understand that nature doesn't create stuff when it's unnecessary. It doesn't make any sense. It would be weeded out. An emotional dog would be weeded out of nature because it's a waste of energy, and energy costs. So self-understanding, they develop what is necessary. We need to recognize that dogs are superior, that is, more capable in areas that matter as a predator, not as a human social animal. Those areas are specialties at survival. Okay? How they hear, how they smell, how they see, what they think, responding to motion, movement, how they control territory, how they communicate with territory, movement. Okay? All of those things. So therefore, dogs have their answers. We think we have ours. Their answers are just as right as ours, guys. And it's the only answer for them. They do not understand what our answers are. They don't. You can train the heck out of them to do something that is not natural for them, but it doesn't mean that they understand that in that way. Okay. You train the heck out of them, they think their survival depends upon that training because you have trained them into that. That's not a natural thing other than to survive with you. So that becomes their purpose, and that's how dogs have jobs with humans. Okay. Canine manipulation of the environment. Canids versus bears versus cat lines. Those are all the same predatory background. All those have come from the same mammalian predator specialist back 98 million years ago, and split off from each other. The manipulation of the environment is local only. So they don't have plans to change the world. They don't have plans to change their environment specifically. They live a life in that environment. If the environment changes and is not conducive to their survival, they move on or they die. They don't sit there on that territory and say, well, this is mine, I got to change everything. They don't have the capabilities of doing that. So their adaptation to other environments, obviously they've spread all over the world. You can say that humans took them with us, and that would be true, but they've adapted. They've adapted to live with us, just like we've adapted to live with them. Again, cranial capacities, their problem solving is limited to what's possible within a natural lifespan. They don't need to design a cathedral that takes 100 years and 3 generations to build. So their short lifespan and how they understand things, their problem solving is about what they have morphologically and what they need, how they need to handle it as a predator. Creation of skills and strategies to adapt to the environment and survival, food sources. And when living with humans, most of the time, if the humans are decent, they're going to provide the food to the dogs. Even if they've got hunting dogs or things like that, they're still going to provide, or sled dogs, anything. They're going to provide the food sources. Now, the dogs may assist us in getting that. That was the intent behind us getting together, 30,000 years ago in the first place, was as a hunting partner. And that is something that makes a huge difference in the ability to live together in a pro-social pack. Yeah. Safer environments, in other words, establishment of territory. If you know the territory, the unknown is what's always stressful. So if you establish a territory and there's enough food, water, and shelter for us to survive, that's your territory and you will protect that. So that's the safe environment. That's the understood environment. Now, if things change within the environment, you may have to branch out. So whether you bump into another predator or predators, that's the risk. And so that's not necessarily a safe thing, but you may require it for survival. Cooperative cognitions to control and change the immediate environment. So there's no overall species-driven plan to conquer the world. It's just that particular thing to control the environment. Control the environment is against other predators coming into that territory. Change the immediate environment is dig a den. Dogs know within 3 weeks that they manipulate environment. Within 3 weeks of age, they start understanding they can manipulate the environment. They have that cognition. So they do, and they experiment around, but only within their lifetimes. Environment and human-driven change of brain patterns. So drive emphasis, in other words, humans have created specific breeds for their specific drive emphasis. We put two dogs together that were better at herding rather than going and killing those animals of ours. So they herd, they round them up, etc. And so we start breeding those into a new breed, essentially. So those are changes of brain patterns. Now, over thousands of years, dogs obviously have changed massively to adapt to new purposes and expectations as we've taken them with us to do new jobs, to be in new environments, to eat new foods, all of those things they've had to adapt. We have collectivity in mass groups. They have small group collectivity. So small numbers, and again, species-driven specializations. The prosocial cultural creation based upon environmental adaptations. So what does that mean? Well, we have certain dogs that are kind of non-prosocial in their nature. The ovcharka that sits out in the field its entire life by itself. Xolosinquiles, they're pretty much loners as well. There's different types of dogs that are kind of loners with the humans versus pack animals like Siberian Huskies. So, but they're still small groups, and they recognize that survival means getting with others. That's the prosocial aspect. Okay, so you survive better with others. So their concept of how many is the difference between us and them. So, conclusion of canine-based biases, dogs are canine predators. That's what they are. Each new generation has to learn basics of how to be a dog, how to use its morphology to survive best within that environment. They have to be cooperative and have adaptations for prosocial to create the best and most fulfilled dog. That's with humans, dogs, any other animal. Okay. And a balanced dog is a fulfilled dog. Okay. Natural entropy still rules. Brains and physical life require high energy to power. Life is always looking for a more survivable way through problem solving and adaptation, same as humans. Change is the most stressful thing in life. Dogs will avoid massive changes and even most minor changes if allowed to do so. That's the key with humans there. If it's allowed to avoid any changes, in other words, you don't ask anything of it and it always gets fed regardless of what it does, all of those things, then why change? So it requires more thought and effort, therefore more time and energy to adapt, but that is what survival requires. If you don't present issues, problem puzzles in front of them, there's no need to adapt unless there's an easy way to live out their life. So, okay, and that's what they do. Established pack and territory helps to prevent massive changes from happening in short periods of time. With us, it's our culture, our massive cultures of multiple humans. So chaos, trauma, and potential death happens if everything changes. Change for the individual does not necessarily change the next generation in this case. Genetic changes occur in rapid successions when humans choose and select or segregate dogs for human purposes. To make change in behavior, it requires either traumatic or longer-term sequential learning and adaptation. Positive outcome of change is its own reward. I stopped because that's emphasis, guys. So a positive outcome, you being happy for the dog finding a mouse and eating it, whatever that positive reward is, that's its own reward for better survival. If everything is stable, nothing has to change or adapt. Adaptation and learning is only required when there's a transition. So go back to transitions and thresholds, those talks. Dogs wish to maintain survivable order in the way they perceive it, not in the way you do. If there's no order in the way they see it, they must act in self-interest and how it sees itself in terms of the pack dynamic. So self-interest isn't selfishness, it's survival. And so most dogs are in charge of what they're in charge of, and the human isn't. And the human always thinks they're in charge of everything. That's a huge gap. So we'll talk about that next time. Okay. So our next one is November 20th. That is human dog bias problematics. So what causes the difference between the biases? So I hope to see you guys there. I hope this was at least a little bit informative. Some of it may have been a review for some of you guys who've been to a number of the courses, but it never hurts to re-emphasize the importance of these things. So thank you very much. Appreciate you guys. Adios.
Thanks, Nelson. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Nelson.